I think so many people are like afraid to want to remember their baby proudly because it's kind of like society kind of accepts that, oh, your baby died. You're supposed to kind of like bury it. You're supposed to like not talk about them because it's so sad. And I guess like that doesn't sit well with me.
Hey guys, thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Mom Talks with Krista. This is part 2 of my interview with Amanda Feltman. And if you missed part 1, I highly recommend you go back and watch that one first. In that last episode, she talks all about her first daughter, Juniper, who was stillborn, and just shares what she went through, the journey, and how she works every day to keep Juniper's memory alive. In this episode, Amanda's going to talk about how almost exactly 3 months after the birth and death of her first daughter, Juniper, she found out she was pregnant for the second time. So she's going to walk us through the journey of being pregnant again and everything that, went on, and kind of some crazy coincidences that happened between Juniper and Coral's pregnancies. So check it out. It's another awesome interview.
Thank you for sharing that. I know it's probably not easy. Listening to it, I think, is just like your strength really like shines through. And like, I just think it's incredible to show how you were able to cope with it and how you still were set on, pictures and just like keeping her memory like beautiful and alive. And so thank you for, being so vulnerable and sharing that.
It's always interesting. Like, I never shy away from sharing Junie. Obviously, I post all over Instagram, and I've done talks like this and articles like on Love What Matters. But it's always interesting to me that whenever I share Junie's story, I tend to cry at different points, which is really interesting. So, and I think, honestly, doing things like this helps me cope and helps me keep Junie's memory alive. And I think that's really, really important since she's no longer here to do.
I was reading your article and you said the way some people had reacted to it was a little like naive and they would maybe make comments and stuff. So what was one of the ways that you kind of learned to either respond or kind of ignore the comments and just kind of keep your head on straight and just keep focusing on, yourself and your family?
By sharing Junie's story, I'm always trying to just bring about a better level of understanding. It seems like talking about the death of your baby is, even though it's 2020 and we have terms like rainbow baby and things like that, it's still very taboo. And people think that in a way, like especially with stillbirth, that we didn't get to see her take a breath, that she's like less of a loss, which to me is just absurd. And I also think that like it kind of seems that stillbirth, especially again, is kind of like shrouded in this like dark, I mean, it's terrible. I absolutely hate that my daughter died. But I think we can also remember our babies with pride. And I'm really fierce on making sure that her death doesn't define her. And I want to kind of keep her memory alive and keep her legacy going, that she can still bring joy to people. And I absolutely love on Instagram when people message me and say, oh, I saw this orange thing and it made me think of Junie and it made me smile. And I think that's so important because after Junie died, it felt like all anyone could say was sorry for your loss. Here's a condolence card, just icky funeral homey type things. And like, I appreciate that. I also like, I'm still a mom, even though you didn't see my baby, and I'm still very proud of her. And you can say her name and you can ask me like, oh, what do you think she'd be doing at 6 months? What do you think her favorite food would be? What do you think her first word would have been? Things like that just make my day because that is how myself and I know many other moms are. You think every day what your baby would be like. And just because they died doesn't mean you need to stop thinking about those things, and doesn't mean you need to stop thinking about your baby.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that's so important, that to approach Junie that way and her death and everything. And one thing I love, back to the photos, I love to share her photos in color. Mm-hmm. I don't think that our babies are something to be feared. I don't think they are something to be labeled with trigger warnings. I think our babies are beautiful, and yeah, it's sad that they have died in those photos, but they're the only photos we have. They're the only photos that we'll ever have of my daughter. And I think it's really important to share them and to approach them with smiles and remember them happily.
I love that. And I totally agree with you how has been such a taboo topic. And so I think it's so important that you're sharing your story and keeping her alive in this like beautiful way that inspires other moms who have been through something similar to do the same thing. So 3 months, if I'm correct, 3 months after this, you found out you were pregnant with your second daughter. So what kind of went through your mind, and what did you go through when you first found out?
So yeah, we found out we were pregnant again right before Christmas. When I found out I was pregnant with Juniper, it was the day of my husband's Christmas work party. And the day I found out I was pregnant with Coral, it was the day of my husband's Christmas work party. So that became the biggest mind fuck of everything. Was I felt like I was living my life in repeat. Like, every year you go to your friend's house for the Super Bowl, you go to a country music festival, you do these things. And the year prior, I was we go to this country music festival, and I was 28 weeks pregnant there. And then I was 28 weeks pregnant at it again, which was just absolutely insane. So my due dates with my girls were 3 days off from each other, just a year later, obviously. It was really hard to wrap my head around that. In the beginning, that was like the best thing, to have the same dates like that. And it honestly got harder and harder because being pregnant after loss, other than leaving Junie at the hospital, that is the hardest thing I've ever done, was to be pregnant again, especially after a full-term stillbirth, because every day that I remained pregnant, it felt more and more likely that my baby would die again. And I remember early on, my doctor in my second pregnancy had asked, like, what more appointments do you need? And like, part of me felt like the more appointments I had, the more I'd get lied to, in a way, like, because that's kind of how it felt with Junie in hindsight, was that I was watched so closely and she still died. So with Coral's pregnancy, I tried to strike the balance between enough appointments that I felt like we were checking in often enough, but also not too many that it felt like, okay, good news, good news, good news. When's the bad news coming? And then just with all the circumstances involved, Coral was born 2 days before Junie's first birthday. So I was induced at 37 weeks with her. It was really hard at the end when people had asked me about appointments. I really didn't want anyone to know that I was going to the hospital. The hard part with Junie's birthday and the fact that we found out on the day of my last regular appointment was everyone knew that was my last appointment with Junie. And we live in a small community. And so people saw my car at the hospital. People saw my location on Snapchat the day Junie was born. So while I was in labor with Junie, when she had already passed away, I was getting texts from people, "You're having a baby," or "How did your appointment go?" And then I didn't respond. And so they knew something was up. And everyone, of course, assumed you're having a baby. And then that subtitle is you're having a baby that's alive. Like, no one ever thought the opposite, including my mother-in-law. I would always text her after appointments, like, "Baby looks good, baby looks good." And that day she had texted me, like, she knew my appointment was at 8 a.m. and she texted me at like 11:30 when I was at the hospital, "How did your appointment go?" And then we weren't responding, and then she was calling us, and then we weren't answering. So that was an especially hard part of Junie's birth story. Coral was born on Wednesday, August 7th, 2019. I talked a lot with my therapist and with other moms about hearing that first cry. And I know some moms have been induced a little earlier, and so then maybe babies had respiratory problems or whatever. So we talked a lot about that first cry, because I know a lot of lost moms, baby came out and didn't cry. And we talked a lot about, like, okay, like, and sometimes babies don't cry right when they're born. And so she's like, don't focus on that too much, or like, baby will cry when baby cries. And so she did cry, and that was amazing. And I think I had like low expectations there, which helped. But then a thing I wasn't prepared for was when she opened her eyes, because we never saw Junie's eyes. And I was like, holy shit, like, her eyes are open. So that was crazy. A thing to mention is that we had Coral in the same room that Junie was born in, which was really special.
Yeah.
And then we also requested the same nurses to take care of us with Coral as Junie, which which was nice because then we didn't have to like re-explain our story every time our nurse came on or get asked, is this your first baby? And no one called me a first-time mom. So that was really, really helpful.
Yeah, I'm sure it helped that they knew you and your story a little bit better. And I can't even imagine what you're feeling that first time Coral opened her eyes and you saw. Were you feeling a little more like relief that she's here and I can see her and everything's okay? Like, what were you feeling at that moment?
Physically, my body was like, hooray, you're not pregnant anymore. Like physically, my body was like, okay, we've done this twice in 1 year. Like, let's take a breather. So she cried and that was beautiful. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like she's here. And she looked so much like Junie right when she was born. And like, since she's grown, she's kind of gotten her own looks, which is fun. And I think she looks enough like Junie. Like they look like sisters, but not like it's not, oh my gosh, she replaced Junie or she's Junie reincarnated. Like none of that. Like they are sisters. Junie was our first, Coral is our second. And then like she cried, she opened her eyes, and then she just like hung out on my chest and I kept like poking her. I was like, keep crying. Like she was quiet. She was just looking at me like, dude, what are we doing? You know?
So how will you continue to keep her memory alive with Coral and, as the years come by?
Junie is just such a seamless part of our life that it's really like natural in the most unnatural sort of way. Like the first time Mitch and I left Coral for a few hours, we went to a banquet and someone came up to me and they were like, who's watching Junie? And like, that just made my heart sore that like, she's so much a part of our lives that they said her name on accident instead of Coral's. Even the other day I was texting my cousin and I was talking about how motherhood can be kind of lonely and that I was like, oh, I'm home all day with Junie. And I was like, I mean Coral. And so that was kind of, it's really amazing to see that. And I love when any little way that Junie can always be included. When people send Christmas cards and her name's on there, that's so important to me. It's really powerful to see all 4 of our names together. And it really hurts if only 3 of our names are together. People sent Junie birthday cards, which was really great. We have her photos all over our house, of course. Actually, there's one right there. Hi, Junie.
Oh, yeah. Awesome.
And Coral's middle name is June for Juniper, which is really special. And I call her Coral June all the time, which is really, and it's not Coral Juniper, because I think that would just be a little too much. So yeah, it's all those little ways that she's just always involved in. Like we call Coral little sister, Junie's big sister. All those little things really add up to be really, really big things. And it might sound silly to some, like outside of a situation like this, but like when people text me, how are the girls today? Even though like Junie's not here, like just saying girls plural, like is huge to me. Even if I respond like, oh, Coral is good, like just saying that in the plural is helpful.
That's awesome. And I think that's so helpful to share because it is one of those times where I think people don't know if they have the right words to say or right things to say. So I think it's so helpful.
And how I approach the death of my daughter may not be how someone else may approach the death of their baby. But I do know that the way that I have been grieving out loud and the way that we do include Junie has been helpful for other moms to hear and to see and to kind of adapt in their own grief. I think so many people are like afraid to want to remember their baby proudly because it's kind of like society kind of accepts that, oh, your baby died. You're supposed to kind of like bury it. You're supposed to like not talk about them because it's so sad. And I guess like that doesn't sit well with me. So I've learned to be really direct. And if you say something to me that I don't like, I will let you know kindly. And I'm also a firm believer that just say something, take 2 seconds to think about it, but say something.
Your strength, literally, I'm like, I can like feel it through the way you talk about Juniper and just the way you just share your story. And I think it's so touching.
That's good because I've been crying a lot today and I don't normally cry this much, but we'll blame the postpartum hormones, the breastfeeding, mom of 2, the lack of sleep, all the things.
Exactly. It's all good. Yeah. No, it's awesome. But thank you so, so much for coming on here and sharing your story. And for everyone that's watching, can you let them know where they can follow you on social and see more about your story?
Instagram is the best place to contact me. My Instagram handle, as I mentioned before, is orangeafmama. And you'll see lots of pictures of my girls there, lots of pictures of Junie.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. I am so honored that you came and shared your story with us, and I think you're going to help so many moms.
Thanks so much for watching this episode of Mom Talks with Krista. If you want to continue to follow Amanda and Juniper and see more about her story and how she's keeping her memory alive, follow her on Instagram at orangeafmama. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Mom Talks with Krista. If you're not yet subscribed, go ahead and click on the subscribe button. It should be down here somewhere. We release new episodes every single Wednesday. And if you're not following us yet, be sure to follow us at Mommy Knows Best on Instagram. And remember, if you're watching this and doubting yourself, you are a great mom. So thanks so much for watching, and we will see you next week.